Well, a lot has been said about our government's slow response to the violence and looting in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, that we didn't have enough intelligence, that our police force wasn't up to the challenge, and that it took too long to deploy the army to assist. So, while some cabinet ministers quarrel amongst themselves about who said this or who knew what, are there any consequences for their actions? Well, we've asked crime expert Guy Lamb to help us with this. Good morning to you, Mr. Lamb. Thanks so much for joining us. Realistically, what can be done to hold these ministers accountable for seemingly dropping the ball?
Well, there's not a lot that can be done at the moment. I mean, certainly this is a key role for Parliament to come into this. We've already had a number of parliamentary meetings that have been happening virtually in relation to the security cluster. Some questions have been asked, but of course, these are cabinet ministers who represent the ruling party, and the ruling party is fairly dominant within Parliament. Of course, opposition political parties have been asking questions, but ultimately it comes down to parliamentary committees and chairs of parliamentary committees trying to hold ministers to account. I think it's also about the ruling party needing to hold ministers to account. But of course, if as South Africans we can stand up and we can start mobilizing and lobbying around, calling for government to make specific changes, for them to kind of make sure that these sort of things don't happen, and to try and get those sort of ministers and senior government officials to take responsibility for what happened. So our options are a bit limited at the moment, but there are some.
I mean, I suppose there could be a cabinet reshuffle, but my question is, in the run-up to the outbreak of violence, it didn't take a lot of intelligence to know that there was going to be a problem and that there were calls for violence and looting. Why were we so unprepared?
Well, I think there's kind of different considerations here, and we're still, really unpacking and trying. The evidence is starting to reveal itself around what happened, but I think it had to do with a lack of coordination between intelligence services within South Africa. So, state security agency, crime intelligence, military intelligence. I think it's about the sort of sense of the threat wasn't taken that seriously, which was quite concerning because, history has shown us, certainly in KwaZulu-Natal, that elements and groups were able to mobilize people to perpetrate violence. We seem that intelligence was prepared according to the Minister of State Security, and it was submitted to the police and to others, but no one seems to have taken it particularly seriously. So I think it's around the kind of threat framing seems to have been a problem, kind of a misunderstanding of the situation, but then also it really kind of exacerbated sort of crises, not only within the intelligence services, but within the police. It's just that, it wasn't really capable to deal with something like this, and has been fighting internal battles over a number of years. And it's kind of like it's sort of stymied it.
That really flows into my next question, which was, we have the president saying it was an attempted insurrection, and then his subordinate, the defense minister, Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula, rubbishing this claim. What does that say about the cohesion of our cabinet and our security forces?
Well, I mean, certainly we know that, for a number of years, there have been, different groupings within the ruling party that have kind of disagreed on, what direction the party should be taking, what kind of policy priorities the party should have. Of course, this has also been linked to personalities. And I mean, ultimately, that kind of played out within the context of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng recently. But in terms of the disagreement, I think it's about, what was this? And of course, it had insurrectionist elements to it, but there were other forms of violence too. But it was who was the target here? So you have, from a state point of view, a government point of view, clearly there was some insurrectionist tendencies and objectives on part of the groups that were perpetrating and instigating the violence. But from the ruling party's point of view, from the ANC's point of view, you had factions within it who were doing things that were trying to undermine the kind of socioeconomic revolution that has kind of been sort of the discourse the ANC has been using. And usually when you've got factions that kind of do things that are counterproductive to that, the term counter-revolutionary is used. So that would be my interpretation of why the Minister of Defense and military veterans made those kind of comments. But I mean, the point is around this was an attack on state facilities. It was an attack on the economy. It was an attack on ordinary people. It wasn't around attack on the ANC per se. Obviously had implications for the ANC, but that has to do with this kind of sense of who do you represent. And I think what the Minister of Defense is, the hat she may have been wearing when she made that comment was more of an ANC hat than a ministerial hat.
Those who've been arrested for insurrection and are going to appear in court for inciting violence. It's very old legislation that's been relied on. It's sort of apartheid era. I wonder how these charges are going to stick and if we're going to see a full successful prosecution way down the line.
Yes, I mean, that's a big question at the moment because, we've seen some cases where violence has been instigated against foreign nationals, and there has been some, legal action pursued against individuals that have done this. But we've never seen something like of this scale in sort of a democratic South Africa. So it's all going to come down to the evidence. What evidence does the National Prosecuting Authority have? Are they able to link what individuals said? Not only in person, but also on social media and through text messages, link that to the perpetration of violence. And that's ultimately going to be the test.
Guy Lamb, thank you so much for your insight as always, a criminologist affiliated with UCT and Stellenbosch University. Thank you for your time.